Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out in person and online. It's really wonderful to see so many people, and many that I know and some that I don't. And so it's just, I hope we have a good experience here today. And while all that Courtney said is certainly factual about my experience, I really believe that the most influential path of my life came when I first met Lama Alan Wallace 40 years ago when I was in my 20s. And he introduced, I was in Christian seminary, I was getting a Master's of Divinity, but he introduced me at that time to Buddha Dharma, and I never turned back. It just made sense. And I've been studying and practicing ever since. I've probably been to one of his retreats on every subject he teaches, so you'll hear a lot of Lama Alanisms in my teaching as well. And so I do want to give my great gratitude and appreciation to Lama Alan and to all of my teachers who have influenced my knowledge of the bardo, the psychology and theology of bardos. These are the realized masters. I'm just an educator. And so I'd like to pay homage to the teachers who I've stood on the back of these teachers as I try to make sense of what these bardo teachings are. And I'll name some of my important teachers, but please, for yourself as well, pay homage to your important teachers. For instance, and there's many as you can think of. I still include my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Romy, in my homage every morning. She introduced me to the heart of awakening, of compassion, and she stays in my prayers every day. But for these teachings, I really want to pay homage to the Venerable Gyaltsen Rinpoche, Yangtang Tulku Rinpoche, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, Tulku Sanak Rinpoche, by association, Trungpa Rinpoche. I never met him in person, but I sure have studied his contributions. And then, of course, Lama Alan Wallace. So. And while we're at it, let's set our aspiration that these teachings and what happens here today be for the greatest possible good for all sentient beings, which of course includes you and me as well, right? I always try to teach myself as I teach others. That way it's a twofer. So set that aspiration. So on to the bardos. What am I really going to talk about here? And there's a vast amount of literature on the bardos. This is maybe half of the books that I have in my library on the different bardo states or the transitional experiences. And many great teachers, many great realized teachers will teach on it. So what are we going to do here today? And today, I'm going to try to focus on the nature of the bardo, the nature, the experience of the bardo. And here we're going to, hopefully I'll make it make sense to you that the bardo is essentially a gap between the known and the unknown. Uncertainty is in the middle. Our practice is to relax into the uncertainty. And so for each of the bardos, I'll give a brief definition according to Buddha Dharma. If you want to know more, lots of texts, lots of teachings, you can find them easily accessible. But I'll give a brief definition according to Buddha Dharma, and then I'll describe what that bardo might look like in our lives, our lived transitional phase, this life, birth to death. And then what practices are most effective to do in this life to be the best prepared for the bardos after death when we have no mind and body to work with. It's much easier now. And so that's my goal. Generally, I teach this material in a retreat, and we do all these practices in real time, in guided imagery and group work. But here I hope to make it just to describe the practices in a way that you can take with you and do on your own. So the bardo teachings are inherent in all paths of Buddhism. They're explicitly taught in Vajrayana and Dzogchen, but they can also be found in the Sutrayana teachings in the Pali Canon, and also in the Mahayana scaffolding around, ascertaining emptiness and Buddha nature. So all the way through, and all the way into our lived experience here. And there's a lot of nuance to each of these bardos, particularly from the Buddha Dharma perspective. There's many associated practices. Let's just take the bardo of death, one that we all are somewhat familiar with or have heard. We are going to die. There's practices, poa, there's, transference, there's shitro, there's chud, and there's the successive dying stages, the outer dissolutions, the inner dissolutions, all the lights that go along with that. And then once you get into the bardo of the becoming, there's the abysses and and so there's all these things, and we're not going to go deeply into those nuances. What we're going to go in deeply into is the experience of being in that particular gap, how it looks in life and how we practice in life for that moment of death. According to Trungpa, bardos can be seen purely in terms of the lived situation that we're trying to work on. And whatever happens after death is simply a continuation of what is happening to us now in this life, even though it manifests in significantly more unfamiliar ways once we no longer have our body and mind to lock onto. And so in just these books that I brought, the Natural Liberation, translated by Alan Wallace, commentary by Gelter Rinpoche, this one, which is extremely helpful, Journey of the Mind, translated and taught through Trungdu Rinpoche, and Luminous Emptiness, Trungpa and Francesca Fremantle. Here's one of the many versions of Tibetan Book of the Dead, introduced by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There's many great translators, and anyway, but they all pretty much will say, this is not made up by me, I'm not psychologizing the bardos. They will all say that the details are very much what happens in our daily living situation. So I'm not making that up. There's a parallel. It's not necessarily a linear, progression from life, death, becoming. It's more like a reality that is emanating and manifesting here in life and after death. Hopefully that will become more clear as we talk. Okay. So let's first of all get a good phenomenological understanding of the bardo or gap. And bardo literally means a period of time between two events. It can be, in life, it can be short, like the cessation of one moment, arising of the next. It can be long, as in a whole lifetime, as in the case of our current bardo of life. And after death, there are traditionally 6 bardo states. Depending on the individual, different experiences occur. And liberation can occur during any of the 6 bardos, either here in our lived experience or after death. And one should prepare in our lifetime to be liberated, right now, know what practices to apply. And so let's just enumerate the 6 transitional phases, the 6 bardos, according to traditional Buddha Dharma, and just get that over with and have it as our reference. I think you've all heard about the 6 bardos. And then we'll go in further into the gap and the experience of the gap. So first, there's the transitional phase of living. It's a lifetime that has a beginning and an end. And, of course, we all think, yes, I know exactly what that is. I'm in it right now. But if you wanted to really, come face to face with where you are in your lifetime right now, you could do this easy little exercise where you draw a timeline. And here's your birth at this end, and here's your death at this end. And put your X where do you think you are right now. Really confront, how much time do you think you have left? Where are you in this in this bardo of living right now. Now, I've been doing this with my academic classes for 35 years. When I started out, my X was way over here. And every year it went further and further towards. And here I am where I think I am now, and of course, what do I know? Statistically, I may have another 20 years, or I may not. We don't know when death will come. It will come, but we don't know when it will come. It started already. So really, confront. Look, where are you in your transitional phase of life? The next two bardos are sometimes called sub-bardos of the bardo of life because they occur during our lifetime. And that's the bardo of meditation and the bardo of dreams. Meditation we cultivate, dreams facilitate our seeing through delusion. And those first three are pretty easy to accept. We can see and experience them right here in our life. These next three, the last three, are a little more difficult to substantiate by experience anyway. And we have to kind of rely on the reports of those who have died and come back to life, or who remember their past lives or bardo experience. And there's more of those folks than you would suspect, but we're not going to go into that. Let me just delineate the last three. There's dying, which can be quick, like a mortal wound, or lengthy, like a terminal illness. It entails stages of dissolution. There's the transitional state of the dharmata. It's ultimate reality. It's when the body and mind separates and the pure energy, the effulgence, the emanation of the Dharmakaya just hits you with all your, with the five elements, colors, lights, sounds, displays. And it's a very interesting part of the bardo sequence. And then the last one is the bardo of becoming, transitional phase of becoming. And that's the period between when you know you're dead and the next rebirth. It's considered to be terrifying, painful, difficult. It lasts until conception. It's the one we usually refer to when we talk about bardo. It's the famous one that everybody refers to. It's the one we're most concerned about. And so those are the six bardos according to Buddha Dharma. But within our lives, there are gaps in bardos that we can practice in. And so let's look at the nature or the energy of these gaps that we experience. So from a sort of a phenomenological or psychological point of view, and remember, psychology is like less than 200 years old. Buddhism is 3 millennia old. Buddha Dharma, based on the teachings of Shakyamuni, is 2,500 years old. So we can't expect too much from psychology. And yet here in the Center for Contemplative Research, we do try to blend the two to see if there's something about psychology or science, any of the sciences, that help to illuminate Buddha Dharma in a way that contemporary individuals like us could perhaps hear it and absorb it in a deeper or more relevant way. So I think it's worth doing my part to integrate here. I am a psychologist. But again, let's not expect too much from psychology. I'm always on the alert, like when is something like self-help more like self-clinging instead of liberation? And so please use your discernment as well. Votes are not in on psychology. But let's get back to gaps. Short or long gaps are peak points of experience in between the known and unknown. So here's some examples. Do a little inventory in your own life. It can be between life events. Think divorce, retirement, change in vocation, change in location. You're leaving the known and you're stepping out into the unknown and you're not quite sure what's next, or at least you shouldn't be quite sure what's next because you're probably wrong. You're probably manufacturing it. The ego loves to do that. We like certainty. But the gap is what's in between. It can be between identities, who one was in one developmental stage versus another. Sometimes they're predictable. Sometimes we even try to make them happen. Think of all my friends in puberty who, were just waiting for their parts to develop, If they could only make it happen at the same time as all their friends, a lot of angst would be avoided. Those are developmental changes. Sometimes we don't even know when they happened. I give this example of my 32-year-old daughter. She looks very young. She still wears clothes that she wore in 8th grade, and for the longest time, she never got carded. She never got asked for her identity if she ordered a drink. And then just one day, no, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. She was carded for a long time until she was 30 because she looked so young. But then one day, nobody asked her for her identification. Thereafter, she never gets asked anymore. She's like, well, when did that happen? When did I become the adult? It didn't happen at 21. Didn't happen, here I am at 32 and I'm finally, not getting carded. When did that happen? When did that developmental change happen? So it's those kind of, changes in stages and ages and that sometimes we can predict, sometimes we can feel, and sometimes we just find ourselves in new territory. Certainly gaps can be seen between life and death because there's a lot of aging and sometimes illness and sometimes quite a long time of dissolution before your body is declared finished. There's gaps between sleeping and waking, of course, that twilight zone, really fertile moment to take advantage of. We'll talk about that later. There's gaps between meditation and post-meditation. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll have a nice long sit on my cushion and then it's time to get up and go, and I get up and go and I'm like somewhere in between, meditation and post-meditation. There's a gap there. And so those are some of the big chunky gaps in our lives. There's also very subtle ones, like when we've established our sense of I am, but then we release the ego for one reason or another. There's just a little gap there. There's maybe even a refreshment there. Taking refuge sometimes can be a gap, like, we have fleeting thoughts and feelings that come and go. There's gaps in between those, should we be able to zero in on those. We have dominant moods that arise sometimes seemingly out of nowhere, and then there's a gap as it subsides and another mood comes. If my clients could figure out why their depression comes on or their anxiety comes on and what makes it subside, they wouldn't need me. So there's a gap. There's rising and dissolution of states. And, very, very subtly, as meditators, we know that our world is arising and dissolving every moment. So you can get right down to the micro moment. But regardless of whether it's, one of the chunky ones or the more subtle ones, there is a quality of in-between-ness. And on the one hand, there's this profound uncertainty. Where am I? What am I doing? Is this the right thing? Where's my stable ground gone? On the other hand, there is sort of an increased luminosity, maybe even an excitement or creativity, because anything can happen when you let go of the old and you haven't confabulated, grasped onto, and created the new. In the middle is a very fertile ground. And so we can either feel, in each of these transitional states, we can either feel profoundly confused and frightened and unsure of our ground, that's part of it, but on the other hand, surprisingly liberated and open to new possibilities. And we have that choice in each bardo. We can either enter the bardo and continue to establish our ego with all of its reified patterns, same old, same old, same old. Or we can let go and explore what's in the gap and allow it to reveal possibilities. And there is this, I'm using one of Lama Alancern's eminent scholar. I like it, he respects his scholars so much, and I've learned to use some of his respectful words. And this is definitely an eminent scholar on the phenomena called transition. His name's William Bridges, which always cracks me up. Bridges, transition. And he said that there is, when you enter one of these gaps, keep in mind that there's a distinction between what is a mere change and what is a real transition. He says change is simply situational. You move to a new city, you start a new job, you have a baby, your father dies. But a transition is psychological. It's not the event itself, but the inner reorientation and self-redefinition that you have to go through in order to really incorporate those changes into your life and let them show who and what you are to become. He says, William Bridges says, without transition, change is just a rearrangement of the furniture. The change won't take, and eventually one has to deal with the dynamics of transition. And so it's not just like on our mundane level, you know, we go into emptiness and there's an absence of something and we want to find ways to replace those missing elements as quickly as possible. That's not a real transition, and that's not a transformation, and that won't help you in the bardo after death. You know, just trying to find a way to fill the gap is not a way out. Our practice here is to relax into the certainty, allow a breakdown of the old self-image so you can uncover unsuspecting awareness. And, you know, according to Buddha Dharma and the gap, that background unsuspected awareness is, you know, the ground luminosity. I'll use these terms. They're all pretty synonymous according to Lama Allen. The ground luminosity, also known as the primordial ground or the Dharmakaya or the Buddha nature, whatever term we want to use to describe it, which is largely based on which school you're looking at it from, still there is this ground luminosity. Right, and it's right here in life, and it's right there after death. It's in every bardo. It's between past and present. And if we can just release the anxiety of uncertainty and step into it, the promise is liberation will occur. And this is true for all traditions. I can't say all. I can talk about the ones I've studied. For instance, Christianity. We step out in faith, correct? God's will, not mine. I'm going to step out and see what happens. I'm going to follow the will of God. You know, I loved that particular aspect of Christianity. Or we can take philosophy, Kierkegaard, take that leap of faith, leap into the chasm of the unknown. So this is not, you know, unique to Buddha Dharma. This power that's always present but unnoticed in every moment of existence. And once again, you'll hear me say this in many different ways. If we can practice letting go of the ego with all of its well-worn reactivity and defenses and step into the gap and explore the openness, we might discover that excitement and potentiality where anything can happen. And if we do various practices in life, we might even have a little bit of choice. We might have a little bit of volition based on the power of our meditative practice during life to actually embrace liberation in the bardos after death. So here we go. This is a lot of material. I'm going to go through each of the bardos, give you the traditional description from Buddha Dharma, explain what the phenomenology of the gap is in that bardo and how it looks in our life and what practices you can do to be ready for that moment after death. So hold on to your hats here. Starting with the traditional phase of living, bardo of living. This is the one where we do have the opportunity to prepare ourselves. We start with precious human rebirth. We have one. Awesome. It's precious because there's no guarantee that we'll get another one in our next lifetime. Or even if we do, there's no guarantee we'll have the opportunity to meet and recognize the Dharma again, or any spiritual teachings again. Remember, you know, My PhD is in East-West psychology. When I say dharma, I'm including most all other spiritual teachings. So we're not being sectarian here. So meet and recognize any spiritual teachings again, even Mrs. Romy in kindergarten. I was really lucky. And it's not guaranteed that we'll have the leisure and positive circumstances to practice it. You know, we have a lot of potential for growth and training in this life, but you know, we still, even if we get another precious human life, we're still going to have to go through growing up. It takes a lot of time, and many things can happen before we, you know, have that any potential experience of waking up. You know, for instance, again, take a little self-inventory. How lucky are you? How lucky have you been in this lifetime? Let's look at the 5 individual advantages of having a precious human life. See how many you have. You must have most of them or you wouldn't be here. So, 1, you have taken birth in a land where Dharma is taught. Yes? You have fully functioning sense faculties and a healthy body so you can receive and comprehend and practice the Dharma. Maybe you're lucky enough to have that. No guarantee you'll get to keep it through your life. You know, my eyesight's going. You know, my faculties are not as strong. So we should be grateful for that. You have confidence in the Dharma. How many people hear spiritual teachings and it just rolls off their back, or they really just have too much doubt, not enough confidence to follow it? You have the good karma to not hold wrong views, which I won't go into all the wrong views, but they're basically contradictory to liberation and enlightenment. You know? And you've been born as a human being, so you're able to become liberated. So I think all of us in this room may have most of those. There's also, though, ones we have almost no control over, and those are the 5 circumstantial advantages. One is the appearance of a Buddha in our world. You realize there's dark kalpas where no Buddhas exist. And we're still running on the energy of Shakyamuni Buddha from 2,500 years ago. Maybe we'll get the Maitreya, but will you be reborn in Maitreya's era? We don't know. So appearance of Buddha in our world, this Buddha is teaching and turning the wheel of Dharma. He's not just, you know, hanging out. The teachings are not declining. I like to hope that's true. There are existence of teachers who've perfectly embraced the Dharma. We can think of many places around the globe where that is not true, but here we are here in Crestone, that's definitely true. And you have come in contact with guides on the path to liberation. You know, whether it's Mrs. Romy in kindergarten or whether it's Lama Alan Wallace, the eminent scholar known worldwide. And even if it's neither of those, you can come into contact with so many great teachers through the internet. Dalai Lama's just a YouTube away. So we're lucky, we're very lucky. So we need to acknowledge that and take advantage of this time to use this precious human body. Because, you know, who knows where we'll be born next and what the circumstances are. And probably many of you here have probably heard of the 6 realms, 6 possible realms you could be reborn in. Well, again, let me reassure you that according to all of these teachings and most that I've heard, these 6 realms, yes, possibly are in universal systems that we don't have any direct knowledge of, but my great teachers have also said these 6 realms are right here in our lived experience on Earth. And I'll give you some examples. So let's say you get another precious human rebirth. How do you know it's not tainted or going to be tainted by one of these 6 realms? So there's the hell realms, which is, you could be propelled, there's propulsive and circumstantial karma. You could be propelled to a hell realm because of a predominance of anger and hatred. And we know places, you can imagine, I don't have to take time to create an imagery for you, although I find that a lot of fun. You can think of places on Earth that are predominated by anger and hatred. There's the hungry ghost, the Preta realm, which is where your stream of karma could be influenced by greed, and you might be propelled into a hungry ghost realm. And Psychologists work with anorexics and people with eating disorders. Hungry ghost is very real to us. There's the animal realm, where ignorance and delusion predominate. Our human realm, which of course we're supposed to be very grateful for, but it actually is tainted by greed, aversion, and ignorance. So watch out. You might have a human rebirth, but what is it? What is it going to be tainted by? There's the asuras, the jealous god realm, driven by jealousy and envy. There's the god realm, pride. And this is very real in our life. For instance, in my life, I was born in Concord, California, shared a property line with the Naval Weapons Station, military town. And it was very much an asura realm. Many of my high school boyfriends had fist fights out of jealousy and pride. It was that kind of place. So then, in my adult life, I moved to Marin County, California, where 1% of the people have 10% of the resources, or some statistic like that. The best have the best. But there's so much hedonism and pride and holding on, and it's just so easy there. It's the land, it's the God realm. And in the God realm, there's no impetus. There's not enough suffering to seek dharma and transformation or growth. Most of my clients from Marin County, California, came to me because they were sustaining losses that they didn't know how to deal with. Losses of income, losses of profession, losses of identity. Teenagers that wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't hold the image. So God realm, and now I'm here in Crestone. I don't know, I'll let you characterize what realm Crestone is, but for me it's Shangri-La. It's just, awesome. Place where I can do the most growth. I'll summarize with a couple of metaphors. You know the first one, you've all heard it. How difficult it might be to get another precious human rebirth, and why you should take advantage of this bardo of life now. Here we go. In the depths of an ocean that is as vast as the 3,000-fold universe lives a blind turtle who rises to the surface only once every century. To attain a human rebirth is rarer than the chance occurrence of the turtle surfacing to find its head inside a yolk drifting at random on the water's surface. The second metaphor, compared to the number of beings in the animal kingdom, and think insects and walking beings and swimming beings in the ocean, a human rebirth is as rare as seeing stars in the daylight. So how do we take advantage of this human situation and practice going into the uncertainty of the gap so we make the best use of where we find ourselves? Research from Sela and Ward, if you care to know the psychologists, shows that meeting transition with mindfulness and having specific tools to navigate uncertainty allows us to experience well-being even when life is challenging. So what are these practices? So for this bardo of life, I've got two of them. I pretty much have two of them for all of the bardos. First one, release the struggle, surrender, and go into the emptiness rather than struggling to escape it. You can go into solitude on your own, or you can go into solo retreat, like here at Myosamten Ling, and meditate and walk and rest. But you're kind of just you're going to live for a while in a setting that corresponds to your current reality, which is emptiness, gap, uncertainty, bardo. I wonder how many people come here and stay in the cabins at Myosamten Ling in solitude for 3 months, 1 year, 3 years, because they're in a transition in their life and they want to come someplace where they don't have to sort it all out, where they can do the inner work of transformation and transition. So solo retreat. It's easier to see that everything we ordinarily think of as reality, all that we've left, is really an illusion when you've stepped into a retreat or into the bardo. It's like the real realities of the everyday world get very transparent and insubstantial. And I love that feeling, even here in Crestone. I've been here 4 years. You know, I might read the headlines, but I don't read the articles of the news anymore. Like, it's not real to me anymore. Of course, it could get real very quickly, couldn't it? So you don't want to close your eyes, but you know what I'm talking about. You're kind of removing your old worldview so you can see reality anew and perhaps gain a sense of what's happening and where you're going. And if that's just too alone, rely on a spiritual teacher. You can have a live one or a self-help one. A live one, or you can even use a self-help book, a therapist. Rely on a teacher so you're not alone. Cultivate spiritual friends so you're not alone. Those that will walk with you and not just tell you what to do or expect you to be the old role that you have no interest in playing. So that's number one, release the struggle, surrender, go into emptiness. Number two is surrender to chaos. The gap is filled with chaos. And sometimes you can't escape it into solitude or a spiritual retreat. You have children, you have a job, you've got to keep it going. Yeah, you're in a divorce, everything's changing, your income, your home, your kids, your custody, sure, but you can't just slip out the back jack and go into a spiritual retreat. And so what can you do in the throes of everyday life? You can surrender to the chaos. The chaos isn't simply a mess. It's not a mess. In science, which I'm not very good at, but chaos is pure energy. It's where everything returns for renewal. And so rather than trying to fix something or supply something that's missing, here you're just trying to allow the chaos and go into that formless energy of the situation. It's only from the perspective of your old form that chaos looks frightening. So it looks like nothing's happening there, that it's a big, empty, lonely, chaotic mess, if you've ever been in one of these transitions. And, but let me assure you that something very, very, very important is happening in that chaos. And something is reformulating. And remember, that has to happen for a transition to not just be a change. Something's happening and there's a reorientation of your psyche. Well, how does that happen? I have a couple of my own metaphors. One is, do you remember on the old computers where you could do system restore by doing a defrag? I actually think I got this metaphor from Lama Allen. Well, it's like when you hit that button to defrag and it takes about 15 minutes and and your whole computer is cleaning itself up and reorienting and integrating and discarding and it takes a while and it's like, that's a little bit like what you're doing in the chaos. You're allowing everything to reformulate on its own. You're not controlling it. And the other metaphor is like crossing a very busy boulevard. Pick one in New York or some really, India, some place where it's very, very busy. And your old reality, the known, the roles you're used to playing, is on this curb. But you now step off that curb and you go out into the middle of this busy boulevard and you're not yet to the next curb. Can hardly even see it. You know it's over there probably, but you can't see it. And you're stuck in the middle. And there's all of these cars going by, and maybe if you're in a different country, rickshaws and all kinds of things are going. People and cows and dogs, and it's all going by, and you're standing in the middle, and you're like, this is chaos. What do I do? My life's being threatened. But eventually, if you relaxed into that chaos, you would notice things begin to happen. One car goes by and they wave at you, and you're like, oh, thank goodness somebody has some compassion. Another car goes by and they honk at you, and you're like, oh, wow, aggression, hatred. I definitely am done with that. I don't want any more of that in my life. And maybe somebody comes from afar and tries to walk over to you and help you, a bodhisattva or spiritual friend, and you're like, oh, there is goodness in the world. There's God's grace. Thank goodness. And maybe, you see a gap and you get through one or two cars and you think, okay, there is a way out. And by the way, I'm discovering that I have more strength and stamina than I thought I did. And, you get the idea. You're collecting various lost parts of yourself in this chaos, reintegrating them, reformulating, and finding your way to that next curb. And so that's what that is all about. And by the time you get to that next curb, you will not be who you were when you left that first curb. So that's what surrendering to the chaos is, and that's what's happening in that chaos. So we have to have the courage to do that. So that's the bardo of life and living where we find ourselves. Let's look at the two sub-bardos. Transitional phase of meditation, and then that's followed by the transitional phase of the dream. And from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which one did I bring? I brought, translated by Guillermo Dorje. Well, it's all the instructions for dying, and you can pick up many different translations of it. Here's their description of the phase of meditation. Now, when the bardo of meditation dawns upon me, I will abandon the crowd of distractions and confusions, rest in the boundless state without grasping or disturbance, and gain stability in creation and completion. At this time of meditation, one pointed free from activity, do not fall into the power of confused emotions. And so it's only through this bardo of meditation that we practice in this bardo of life that we acquire the skills to implement the instructions for all of the subsequent bardos. These bardos build on each other, kind of need the skills from one to progress to the other, to the other. And through meditation, you take control of your energy mind, and through mindfulness and introspection, that provides a relief from delusion, cultivates inner stillness, clarity, discernment, freedom from mental afflictions. I'm preaching to the choir here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know a little and have a great interest and practice in meditation, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But we have a real moment in this bardo to awaken, to just stop, let things settle. We sit down from the rush of life, notice what's going on. Otherwise we just go from one impulse to another, to another, to another. And that's not very good practice for anything. So this is where, you can really absorb the disillusionment with the situation we're in of birth and aging, sickness, death, 6 realms of existence. The metaphor here is like, an exhausted person taking a rest. Who wouldn't want to do that? Meditation's awesome. But you won't be able to do it without training. And of course, here at this center, we're all about shamatha and vipassana. And so, it's concentration meditation, stabilizing the mind through shamatha, but it's combined with vipassana. Vipassana on what? 4 Noble Truths, particularly the truth of suffering and the way out of suffering, and the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, which we'll come back to in the handout I just gave you. It's said that shamatha will help to stabilize the mind and release our mental obscurations, but it will not bring you to full liberation. It's through vipassana, really looking deeply into the nature of your mind and of reality, that alleviates the emotional obscurations. And it was, the Buddha's great innovation to combine those two, to stabilize in shamatha and then take the sharp knife, vajra knife of vipassana, and cut through to what's truly real about this, about our condition. And so vipassana from there on was never seen as separate from shamatha. They're always together. And I have the metaphors here come from Drupal Lama Karma. Vipassana without shamatha is like a waterfall in the wind. The mind will waver if you do vipassana without shamatha. The mind won't be stable. However, shamatha without vipassana is like a contained pond. It subdues thoughts and habitual tendencies, but it doesn't liberate. So it's the two together. stability, and insight. That does the trick. The practice of shamatha renders the mind immovable and impervious to the winds of thoughts, but it doesn't uproot the defilements. It's vipassana that eradicates the obscurations of ignorance and the belief in the self. And it is that belief in the self, that self-clinging, that is the cause of suffering, according to Buddha Dharma. It's all that effort we put into the ego, the struggle to exist, our ego's struggle to exist. And think about how much more secure it feels when you have that role to play, a professional, teacher, traveler, and how uncomfortable it feels when a role shifts. And yet, playing those roles, as you have probably discovered when you've had to discard one and move to another, playing those roles are like a contraction. Our ego clinging, our role playing separates, defines, and pushes away. It's an I that is in opposition to you. And then externally, we search for what we think we need from the external world for our happiness. And then internally, we're always tinkering with ourselves to get more happiness. And then we suffer when we don't get what we desire. And then we suffer when we get what we don't desire. So it's a trap. But guess what? We're all going to suffer. What about the 8 complementary types of suffering? The givens: birth, sickness, old age, death, separation from dear ones, meeting with enemies, the loss of what you need and desire, and the presence of unwanted circumstances. Has anybody gotten this far in life without one of those? Or many of those, or all of those? They're all, those are the givens. So it's not about Buddhism is focused on suffering and we have to, uncover every rock and stone of our suffering and poor me. And no, it's built into the system. The span of our bardo of life is built in with at least 8 certain sufferings. And so one of my friends here in Crestone, she always asks me, why is it so hard to release ego fixation? I know it causes me suffering. Try to release it all the time. And yet it seems so sneaky. It sneaks back in. And certainly, part of that is because of the well-worn roles we play, and we wouldn't want to be alive without certain roles. Can't imagine Mio Samten Ling without Aaron and John holding it all together. That role is very important. Hopefully we don't reify you and keep you in that role when you need to get out, but very important role. But I'm just going to read something from social psychology. It's actually quite eye-opening. It's about why it's so hard to release ego fixation. Persons active, recruitment, selectivity, and alter casting. Persons actively recruit the responses they need from others so that they can be the kind of person they are. Think about your life. Is there anywhere you're doing that? And then we tend to handle this by being highly selective in the kinds of material we're willing to discuss. We choose material that's hospitable to our existing identities, and we seek persons and topics that are likely to confirm rather than deny the identity we have. Scary. And then there's alter casting. We then cast these others into relationships which, if they accept them, will place us in the desired reciprocal relationship that offers us the identity we desire. And do you realize we're doing this all the time at an unconscious level? And how boxed in we're making ourselves because of it? Which has really been my greatest interest in implicit bias that's come out in these last few years. We're trying to get at this. We're trying to get at this stuff. So that's what we do with other people but even in our private worlds and our little minds between me and me, think about how much energy you put into navigating what Buddha Dharma calls the 8 worldly concerns. How much energy do you use thinking about and doing image maintenance around gain and loss, having a good reputation versus a bad reputation, praise and blame, and pleasure and pain? You know, if you think about, I've heard it said that in every waking moment we're somewhere teetering between those opposites, trying to gain and not lose. You know, we prefer gain, praise, pleasure, good reputation, but the opposite regularly occurs. And then we try to fix it. It just creates tension and more contraction and more suffering and more karma. And how does karma establish itself? Through normal daily interactions. We create causes for all the subsequent results we experience. Every moment we create causes, every moment we experience results. Results can be due to an immediate previous cause or from causes created way back in our past, even past lives. And half of it we have very little control over. We wish we did, but we don't. For instance, emotions of attachment, desire, and hatred that arise. Nobody taught us how to develop those. Think of a baby that comes out of the womb right away. They might be angry. They had a bad experience going through the birth canal. I have a little niece who was just born. She really looks terrible. She looks really angry, you know, and desire, you know, and aversion. That just comes right out with us, you know, from the moment we're born. And even though we know those things might be negative and trip us up, we experience them anyway. They're deeply rooted in us through many lifetimes. You know, it's, and you really don't know when a certain karmic seed is going to sprout. My favorite, I love being here in Crestone with the San Luis Valley, because you can really picture, what if the valley is just filled with mustard seeds, and that's your alaya, the ground of your mind, where all the karmic seeds are stored. It's completely neutral. There's not some god in the alaya that says, I'm going to bring this seed down on Robin today. I'm going to pop that one out, and she's going to have to experience the repercussions of that one today. There's no God in Buddha Dharma doing that. I don't even think God in Christianity does that. Zeus might in Greek mythology rain down a firebolt. But there's all these seeds out there, just mustard seeds. And when appropriate conditions gather, those seeds will mature. What are the appropriate conditions? Sometimes we don't even know. You know, you don't know when somebody's going to honk at you on Bacca Grande because you're going too slow and make you erupt in anger. You don't know when certain things are going to happen. But when appropriate conditions gather, like the sun and the water and the wind or whatever, certain seeds will mature, appropriate to those conditions. You don't know if you're going to get poppies filled with opioids, or if you're going to get lotuses rising from the mud, or whether you're going to get thistles. You don't know what you're going to get. But karma matures. And when it matures, then we often arise with it. How do we arise with it? Generally through, the simple version is through the 5 skandhas, which Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche says is the 5-step process of the development of the ego. We're going to use this one because dependent arising with its 12 stages is going to take way too long. But generally, a seed emerges, karma begins. And first, there's form. There's a primitive self that's aware of some external event. Then there's feeling. This self reacts to its surroundings. It has feelings. Not quite fully developed emotions, but just kind of an instinctive liking or dislike or indifference. There's perception. This feeling becomes more complicated, and the ego asserts itself by reacting actively. And then the intellect forms concepts, interpretation, puts things together, builds narratives, builds patterns of personality, and then there's a full-blown consciousness. All of this is combined, and instead of perceiving the world as it is, we project all of our own images around it. These elaborations give rise to an endless cycle of further thoughts and actions, and we can continually recreate ourselves from moment to moment. And that confused state is not our real state. And I'll read a quote contributed from Lama Allen before we leave this bardo. It's from the Precious Treasury of the Dharmadhatu by Longchenpa. Longchenpa. See, Kanchug over there cringing. He's my pronunciation help. Longchenpa. Oh my goodness, she's in trouble now. The Spanish version, thank you. Yes, you're right, the masculine version. Okay. When this mind's nature, natural clear light, appears like the orb and the rays of the sun, and it's not recognized for what it is, its unobstructed power is misunderstood and arises as duality, since the observer thinks phenomena are other than self-appearing. The outer projection becomes other than oneself, and then the self thinks the outer projection is true and real, and apprehends it as only that, continually. That apprehension includes all 5 aspects of sensory stimuli, form, sound, smell, and the rest. The manifestation of mind and mental events emerge sequentially, like cloud formations, and although the clear light nature of mind itself can never be obscured, it is temporarily veiled due to non-recognition, like when the clouds temporarily cover the sun. And so, in a nutshell, the practice of meditation enables us to disentangle from that process and stop being identified and entangled in it. And so, how does the gap appear in the bardo of meditation, and what practices can we do to strengthen our concentration and stability? And so right here in meditation, if you're progressing, you may get a glimpse of emptiness. And so one of the dangers in this gap is that the ego may attempt to solidify this open space of emptiness. Like, oh, I got it. Oh, I reached emptiness. Oh, there it is, And so the first practice is just resting the mind in space. It's one of the shamatha practices, resting the mind in space. Whatever you're reifying, including emptiness, including ultimate reality, rest your mind in space. We can also get attached to the subtle levels of realization. And as followers of Lama Allen know, when you reach a certain level of shamatha, bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality arises, and it's wonderful, and you want to stay there, and you might even think that you've reached liberation. You really get attached to it. So again, his recommendation is release it, keep cutting through. You won't reach the primordial ground if you're stuck in the consciousness of the ground of the mind. Keep going, keep going. Another practice is releasing the doubt that arises when sometimes we're dwelling in this blissful experience, but then doubt arises about its validity. Like, is this really going on? Is this really true? Am I wasting my time? What would my mother think? Seems true to me, but I might be just imagining it all, So there's this whole releasing of the doubt that's important in meditation. And so in this gap of meditation, the goal is to let go completely and rest in that boundless state of openness and clarity, the natural state of your mind. I think you're going to start picking up now. We're on Bardo 2. The next 4 will go quickly because I've set the stage. But I think you're going to start picking up that most of the practices in each of these bardos is about releasing the struggle, going into the uncertainty, reaching that openness and clarity of the nature of mind. Okay, By my calculations, I have 15 minutes to do the next 4 bardos. Transitional phase of dreaming. Falling asleep is the closest analogy to dying in our normal experience. And when we fall asleep at night and begin to dream, that is a continuation of mind and mind's appearances which occur unceasingly during our waking state. So when we talk about the transitional phase of dreaming and the practices of dream yoga, it's never just about sleep yoga. It's about nighttime yoga and daytime yoga, seeing through appearances. This is from the Vajra Essence. When you fall asleep, all objective appearances of waking reality, including the physical worlds, their sentient inhabitants, and all the objects that appear to the 5 senses, dissolve into the vacuity of the substrate, the alaya, which is of the nature of space. And they infinitely pervade that vacuity. And then once again, self-grasping consciousness is aroused by the conjured apparitions that come from the movements of karmic energies and the mind states during waking life. And so it's easy to see that in the dream state, when we have no control over what's happening, we spend our time reacting to experiences with attachment and aversion and indifference. So one aspect of practicing in the dream in dream yoga is to practice becoming lucid in your dreams at night. Some people have that at their axis. A lot of people don't even dream or don't remember their dreams. You can learn to do it. If it's not contextualized by the path of transformation found in dharma, or it'll just be sport. You know, anybody. In my field, it's very easy to learn to lucid dream. But it won't lead to any practice of transformation unless you have the underlying context of the other 2 bardos. The bardo of life with the gaps of uncertainty, and then the bardo of meditation with the gap of emptiness. If you have those as your preludes, then when you come to dreaming, nighttime dreaming, then you will be practicing seeing through the appearances of the dreams, not reifying every little thing that comes up. How can you strengthen that nighttime dream yoga? You strengthen it by practicing in the daytime. In the day, the practice is to see all appearances as a dream. And on the basis of that, you can recognize dream appearances at night for what they are. It's said that if you do not have a daytime dream yoga practice, your nighttime dream yoga practice won't be sustainable, and it won't be transformative. So the stability has to be grounded in the daytime, your view of appearances. A couple of quotes from Lama Allen here. We who think of ourselves as the living could really be called the dead, because we are unawakened and living our lives in a dream. When you're dreaming and you don't know you're dreaming, that's ignorance. And you think you're awake, and that's delusion. And now you're vulnerable to everything. So we know that daytime and nighttime appearances, we know this from our bardo of meditation, right? It's completely configured. It's configured by and filtered through all of our conceptualizations, imputations, reifications, hopes, fears, mental afflictions, and so forth. So what's the practice for this bardo in our lived experience? Is it 2? I think I have 2 practices for you here as well. 1, implement as many times as possible throughout the course of the day whatever understanding, experience, or insight you have into emptiness. Begin to notice how in daytime we get lost in our emotions, or we get lost in our speculations, or the dramas of day-to-day life, and how lucidity disappears. And become more aware of this imaginary world that we create out of our concepts, desires, hopes, and fears. As this strengthens, then nighttime lucidity will also strengthen. So that's your daytime yoga. Your nighttime yoga, this is a simple one. There's a lot of techniques for this nighttime dream yoga, but here's just a simple one that whether you dream or not, you can do. Feel vividly the confusion between waking and sleeping, and catch a glimpse of our own uncertainty about who and what we are in that twilight zone. This uncertainty can act as a sudden inspiration to let go of your fixed concepts. So instead of waking up in the morning and immediately going to the list, what do I got to do today, right? Which is like false beginnings, taking too much control. Take some time in that twilight zone between falling asleep and awakening, and try to just hover in that moment of open space, of luminous emptiness. So those are two very easy, doable, everyday practices. Transitional phase of dying. It's said that dream yoga of day and night is primarily intended as a preparation for the phase of dying, because maintaining lucidity as you're falling asleep into the alaya, into the dream, and then waking back up to the alaya and back into life and so forth, perfect preparation for dying lucidly. Okay. Death is generally described and observed as the elements of the body and mind being progressively absorbed from coarse to subtle, one by one, and then that's the final event, dead. And yet, just keep in mind this transformation is actually taking place all the time. The elements that make up our existence are continually arising and dissolving all the time in our life. So again, there's the analogy. And so whenever in our life we have a feeling of something coming to an end and we're trying to hang on to it, that's a taste of this bardo of dying. And so, there's so much here. We could go into all the dissolutions, the outer dissolutions, the inner dissolutions, the lights, and we're not going to do that. We're just going to stay with the experience of it. And the first experience of death is actually is actually uncertainty about whether you're actually going to die, in the sense of losing contact with the solid world. And if you've ever sat through somebody through hospice as they're dying, and I have a few times, there's that moment of confusion. They don't know if they're still like chatting with you and going to live, or whether they're dying. Clearly they're dying, they're being hospiced, but there's that moment of confusion. And it's not about leaving the body, but it's about losing your ground. It's about that potential of stepping out of the real world and into an unreal world. And so just going back to our description of the gap earlier, isn't it just like that? The tangible, logical state dissolves, and one's not quite sure whether they're okay or losing their sanity. So that's the first experience, just confusion. The second experience is the dissolution of the body. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to read you a phenomenological description of death from Luminous Emptiness, and just see for yourself if it applies in any way to your situation in life. So physically, you feel very heavy when the earth element, which is the tangible quality of the physical living logic, turns vague and dissolves into water, and you take refuge in the fact that your mind is still functioning. But when that water dissolves into fire, the mind is not quite sure whether it's functioning properly or not. And you find that the circulation ceases to function. This experience of the fire element makes the temperament of love and hate more important well, at least I still love you, or conversely, I definitely have a perspective on him or her still, so I must still be alive. And when that gradually dissolves into air, any feeling of warmth or growth or expression begins to dissolve, and there's a faint experience of openness, and you lose your grip on hate or love. And when this turns into space, you lose that last feeling of contact with the physical world. Space goes into the central channel, and there's a sense of internal luminosity and inner glow. When everything has become completely introverted, and at this point you're willing to give up because you can't struggle anymore, and a kind of carelessness arises at that moment. The dualistic struggle of trying to be something is completely confused by the two extreme forces of hope for enlightenment and fear of becoming insane. The two extremes are so concentrated it allows a certain relaxation. And when you do not struggle anymore, the luminosity presents itself naturally. I'm going to stop there. There's a little bit more. But if you think about some of the conflicts in your life and the transitions you've gone through, this sort of dissolution process and the ways we try to hang on is very real. It has many parallels with what we actually try to do in life. And yet that is the description of the dissolution of your elements in death. And so you have an opportunity there to recognize a flash of the primordial ground of clear light consciousness. And if you've been meditating, you can fuse your what we call child consciousness with the mother consciousness. And you have a chance of liberation at that time. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Most of us miss it. It's too quick, it's too subtle, we're too attached, we're too scared, and we miss that moment of luminosity and the opportunity to liberate into the Dharmakaya. And so what kind of practice can we do in life to prepare for death? And there are many. There's a lot of Buddhist practices for preparing for death. I'm just picking an easy one from the psychologist Clarissa Pinkola Estes on the death, birth, death cycle. She says each day, just ask yourself two questions. What am I giving death to right now? And what appears to be coming for me to give death to? Just keeping your consciousness awake, aware, and in tune with the death process. So you recognize it in life, and then you'll recognize it at death. And I'm going to kind of synopsize these last two bardos. If you miss that clear light moment of death, then your body and mind separate. And a state of consciousness arises, but it's made up of just your own self-appearances, which doesn't mean like your real appearances, like there's my cat, there's my dog. It's not like that. It's an effulgence from the primordial ground. It's like its luster or its energy or its creative display. And it's filled with sound, light, color, energy. It's called the luminosity of the Dharmata. This is the bardo of the Dharmata. Your impure appearances have dissolved into the ground at death. You didn't recognize the clear light. Now the appearance is starting to densify and come back. They really come back in the next bardo of becoming. But now they're coming back as energy, sound, color, rays of light. Kind of the isness quality of stuff. And Lama Allen says it's like being on a roller coaster without a body. It's like your consciousness is on a roller coaster without a body. And we don't know what all this is, and we don't really have a mind to cognize what it is, but we will reactively project our hopes and fears on what appears. And so if there's a loud sound of aggression and fierceness coming at you and you're afraid of anger and fierceness, you're going to be afraid. If there's peace and love coming towards you, you might embrace it or you might not. A lot of people, I can tell you, have trouble embracing love. Green Tar could come to them in this dharmata and they won't be able to embrace her. And if you have a practice, a Vajrayana practice of achieving samadhi on various deities, doing various sadhanas, this energy could appear for you as the 100 deities of the bardo. I should know this because I teach it, but the peaceful and the wrathful deities, and that would be helpful to you as you're being knocked around by energy in this bardo of the dharmata. It would be very helpful for you to feel like, oh, this fierce energy coming at me is really just Yamantaka or Siyamukha or Vajrayogini. And I know that as fierce as Vajrayogini looks, she really is about the transmutation of anger. I have an opportunity here to transform my anger into, magnetism or fierceness or the removal of obstacles. So if you've done this kind of Vajrayana transformation practice, perhaps you'll be able to see deities instead of just, ghostbusters coming at you. And I always get asked, well, what if you're Christian? Would you see Jesus or Muhammad? And there's two answers to that. Some Rinpoches, like Trungpa Rinpoche, really says that yes, these deities actually exist. They're out there in universal systems that we have no knowledge of. Other Rinpoches will say, no, it's based on your practice. If you've practiced visualizing the subtle forms, the formless forms of deities, then that may arise for you. So therefore, if you have practiced Jesus suffering on the cross, you might see Jesus in the dharmata. And perhaps that will conjure up feelings of love and peace and grace. And that would be very helpful in this bardo of dharmata. So it's what you practice. If you have no practice, there's going to be a lot of light, sound, color, and it's going to be frightening. So what is our practice in this life for that moment? Of course, Vajrayana practice on deities, if that's your calling. But another one is just, we have to train to not be afraid of the terrifying energies and only go for the peaceful ones. The equanimity, the one taste. And so we have to recognize all of these energies, so the terrifying ones and the very pleasing ones. They're all empty of inherent natures. They're all made up of your own projections. They're all made up of your own reactivity. And so that's what you want to practice in life, is your attenuating your projections and tempering your reactivity. You want to train yourself to be able to receive the dazzling intensity of brilliance of life, and you want to train yourself to be not afraid of difficulties and suffering. Trungpa Rinpoche says in the bardo state, even the bardo state of life, you don't want to face the intensity and brilliance of the dazzling colors coming to you, which is a very strong experience. And instead, you want to retreat into a weak, feeble, somewhat pleasant, dark corner. Facing life is too bright and dazzling as well. Sometimes we don't want to accept death, but you're kind of cornering yourself into a potential death rather than facing it and living with it and actually working on it. So if you can't sustain the brilliance of this dharmata, it'll simply pass in an instant. And those 5 lights, 5 colors, 5 elements, 5 facets of primordial consciousness then begin to solidify more and more and more. And focusing on them as real, you'll go into the next transitional state of becoming and take birth in one of the realms. So, in life, practice 1, practice not getting attached to the utter peacefulness, and conversely, practice not being frightened of glimpses of other dimensions or ferocious apparitions. Practice equanimity with the peaceful and wrathful occurrences of our emotions. You know, sometimes we're so peaceful, we've been in retreat, we want to keep it that way, we go home, we think we're transformed forever, and then some special blend of circumstances create an eruption, and suddenly the synergy's broken and you're in the wrathful quality of that peacefulness. Try to see it as simply the wrathful quality of that peacefulness. Same energy. And then finally, try to accept the frightening or distressing situations as opportunities for awakening. Try to accept the things we dislike with equanimity. Because if we fall into ignorance, the subject of object ignorance, all of our projections will seem real and out there and terrifying and harassing. They become what Lama Tsultrim Allione calls our demons, right? And I'm going to make it. I've got 5 more minutes. What we call our, Machi Glopchen says, what we call our demons are not materially existing individuals with huge black forms, frightening and terrifying. A demon means anything which hinders liberation. There are present preoccupations, the issues in our lives, blocking our experience of freedom. So feed your demons. Feed, don't fight your demons. If you if you have a critical lack of imagination, you don't think you have any demons in your life, here's a list. Conflicts we have with our lover, anxiety we feel when we fly, discomfort we feel when we look at ourselves in the mirror, fear of failure, addiction to tobacco, alcohol, drugs, pornography, or money. We might have a demon that makes us fear abandonment, or a demon that causes us to hurt the one we love. A person with an eating disorder might have a demon demanding huge amounts of sweet or fatty food. A demon of anorexia tells us we failed if we eat, and then we'll never be thin enough. A fear demon might be telling us we can't get up in high buildings or take a walk in the dark. But just remember, in life, this is all happening in the openness of space, so it's possible to release our struggle with our hopes and our fears and let go into space. There's always a gap, and that luminosity is available. So in this bardo, the practice in life is watch your projections, watch your reactivity, one taste. If that doesn't happen, we're in the last bardo. If you don't recognize the energy of that bardo, your option to liberate into the Sambhogakaya and into the Pure Lands will end. That opportunity will be gone. And you'll go into the bardo that we're all most familiar with and terrified of, the transitional phase of becoming. And it lasts from that moment until conception. And our confusion and terror from the former bardo will perceive those forms ever more densely, and we really will see them as demons. We drift farther and farther away from the original non-dual awareness and become more and more separate and vulnerable, and these things seem even more external and real. Here is Trungpa Rinpoche's description of that. At the time of death, our 80 types of thoughts and feelings gradually shut down. That was during the death bardo. Now, with the karmic wind shaking the consciousness and driving it out of the body, these 80 types of thoughts are reactivated. They're reactivated into this energy we were just talking about. But, having not recognized this dharmata, the disturbing emotion of ignorance reasserts itself when the person regains consciousness, and this is the beginning of the bardo of becoming. It starts with the arising of the disturbing emotion of ignorance, followed by attachment to phenomena, and finally anger. Summary is, thank you, Trungpa Rinpoche, mind leaves the body. Karmic wind that accompanies the mind begins collecting subtle winds of 4 elements. The elements become reactivated. They form a mental body. Full-fledged ignorance returns with the mind being exactly like the one they had before they started to die. So here's your real reincarnation, is in the bardo of becoming. Your mind arises just as it did before you died. And this is the scary part. We get more involved with our ego again. We drift further into confusion. And we begin to instinctively react to whatever appears with greater self-protectiveness. Things appear fiercer and more threatening. Suffering arises. I won't go into how. You feel terrified. It's based on your karma. The consequences of your thoughts, words, and deeds march before your eyes. Everything you've done throughout your life is shown fully and clearly. The innermost knowledge of all of our secret motives and intentions, even the ones we've disguised from ourselves, manifest. There is confusion, uncertainty, and fear. Typically said there's 6 uncertainties to the bardo beings. Location. The mental body is completely random and in movement. See, it's a mental body without a body. Resting place, powerless to remain settled. Uncertainty of behavior, really unpredictable behavior. Sustenance, powerless to ingest food. Companionship, can only experience temporary encounters. And then mental conditions. The mental conditions are just constantly fluctuating. Can't stabilize them unless you've meditated. And I love Alan Wallace's description. You don't like being here. It's weird and it's creepy and uncomfortable and terrifying, and you want to get back out of there and back to familiar terrain. And you try to adopt a body as quickly as possible. I guess I'll say one more thing before I summarize this. It's widely acknowledged that this bardo of becoming lasts for a maximum of 7 weeks. So here's where we get the 7 weeks. This is also true in many other traditions, like Orthodox Christian tradition, this 7 weeks. And it's also said that after each period of 7 days in those 7 weeks, the bardo being goes through another death, and the visions of the Dharmata arise again, and then you reawaken into this bardo of existence. And this goes on every 7 days for 49 days. You want to get out of there. You're seeking a womb door to be born in, but you won't be able to, because you have to go all the way through the gauntlet of those 49 days before you'll have the opportunity to find a human womb to reincarnate into a precious human rebirth and start the whole thing over again. So how does this gap get practiced in our very life? Well, obviously, in everyday life, dissolution, entering the space of infinite potentiality and reemerging happens continually. And so here's the promise of practicing for this bardo. 1. If it were possible to catch each new moment just as it's about to arise, every thought, every action, every form of expression we make, if we could catch it coming into existence, we might catch it before we're fully committed to its emergence. We could catch it before it emerges as anger, jealousy, or desire. Perhaps we could even see that if it's allowed to manifest, it will cause suffering. And it may still be possible at this stage to avert it and make a direct connection with sanity and goodness. My earliest memory of one of Lama Allen's teachings when I was in my 20s, didn't know anything, didn't understand this proverb forever. It's a Tibetan proverb. You've heard it. Hit the pig on the nose and clean the lamp while it's still warm. It's stayed with me for 40 years. And what it means is just bringing impulses under control before they harden and become established in our minds as habitual tendencies. So that's the first thing, is trying to slow it all down, practice meditation, practice dream yoga, practice becoming familiar with the dissolution of death in the moments of our life, Practice being in the bardo with that sort of, resting in space, free from hope and fear, resting, and try to slow it all down and catch your manifestations before they're allowed to cause suffering. Choose something different. The second practice occurs on that threshold between grasping and giving up, grasping at solidity. That ego that continually wants to reinforce its existence. Try relaxing that grasping. Give up. Relax into the openness. Find that place of possibility, creativity, where anything can happen. So that's all we have time for. I'll summarize by saying that all the instructions concerning the Six Bardos, all of them, you may have picked this up by now, you're a smart crowd, basically deal with allowing the gap to open by undermining our belief in the ordinary world that we take for granted, and then letting go into that space behind, a little bit like the Truman story, the space behind the reality. In the bardo of living, we do this by releasing the struggle and entering the emptiness and surrendering to the chaos. In the bardo of meditation, we do it by releasing attachment and doubt and resting in the boundless state of openness and clarity. In the bardo of dream, we become aware of the imaginary world we create out of our own concepts and desires, and we practice resting in the uncertainty of the twilight zone. In the bardo of death, we ask, what am I giving death to right now in my life, and what appears to be coming for me to give death to? In the bardo of dharmata, we practice the freedom from hope and fear. We utilize eruptions to wake up. We practice equanimity, seeing the Buddha nature in all, and we feed our demons with compassion. And in the bardo of becoming, we avert dependent arisings of anger, jealousy, and desire. We release grasping at solidity, and we relax into the openness of each moment where anything can happen. So this bardo or gap experience in life and after death is a doorway to awakening that's always present. I'll summarize with Trungpa, and I'll end with Trungpa Rinpoche's words. He says, bardo is a very practical way of looking at our life. So hopefully that all makes sense. I think we have a couple minutes for questions before we end with a meditation that brings us all together. That was a lot of material. Again, I don't know that I accomplished my goal of squeezing an entire retreat into an hour, what turned out to be about an hour and 20-minute talk. It's a vast amount of information, and I just scratched the surface. Any questions, burning questions? Yeah.
When you say according to the Buddha Dharma, are you saying that you could go to the Dhammapada and find the reference or support? Okay.
Yeah, it's in all of the schools of Buddhism. Explicitly in Vajrayana and Dzogchen, but also in the Pali Canon and the Dharmapala, and there's references to it. Yeah.
I have one question. In chat.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Victoria, please feel free to come off mute if you'd like.
Thank you. I didn't know that was me. Okay.
Oh, awesome.
This is really fabulous, amazing. I've probably listened to the recording 1,000 times, but I have a million questions too. So I hope you'll appear again somewhere where I am. What I glean from this, and maybe it's because that's my own personal need at this point, one of the things I really love about this monthly gathering, I really struggle with, I'm very much a head person, I really struggle with the maintenance of the daily practice on my own. And what you said about what happens in retreat is question, at least for the, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Basically, my question is, what I gleaned from the whole presentation was the essential, like, life support, if you will, that having the daily practice provides. That it's really crucial for every single living human being, regardless. And would you say that was correct?
I believe it's correct, but let me help you expand what's on that menu. I'm a huge believer in post-meditation practice. And so just if I take a few of these practices we talked about today and highlight them, these are ones that I actually have used a lot in my very busy life, raising a child by myself and working 2 careers. And they're things you can do in your busy life that don't entail sitting on the cushion. And I remember them by this. There's a couple of little, mnemonic devices. One is free from hope and fear. So all day long, if you watch yourself, there's hope, there's fear, there's hope, there's fear. I want this to happen, I don't want that to happen. Just watch that all day long in your daily life and try to release the struggle and free yourself from hope and fear. So that's the second one that I keep in mind. Release the struggle. Release the struggle. Anytime self-fixation is trying to get somewhere, do something, be someone, make it happen, be on time, get that kid somewhere, do this thing, just relax. Release the struggle and carry on. It's very simple, very simple. And then the third thing that I practice in post-meditation in a very busy life or even a non-busy life is watch my reactivity. Reactivity. We're always going into freeze, fight, or flight. I'm going to avoid this, I'm going to confront that, I'm scared of that, freeze, fight, or flight. If you just want to think of those 3 reactivities, they probably cover all of them. So just work with your reactivity to a child, to a job, to the driver on the road. Reactivity. Really easy. And then the fourth thing that has really helped me in post-meditation is just trying to locate the Buddha nature in everybody that I meet, friend or foe. Even a villain has Buddha nature. And so just really trying to, with equanimity, see that we all are sentient beings on a path of growth, maybe in different realms, maybe in different ways, maybe at different stages, but there's Buddha nature in every person. So those are practices you can do in life and not just sit on the cushion.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? How would, if you were advising someone that really struggled with the practice part, because the practice in daily life, I think, is more accessible to my sort of personality. What would you advise about because I get very reactive in the attempt to practice because I'm a perfectionist and I'm just constantly getting more afflicted.
Yeah. Well, Machik Lopdrin has some good advice. She says, tighten, tighten, loosen, loosen, hold it tight, but throw it far, throw it away. Those are her instructions for meditation. And I think that's the key, and Lama Allen talks about this all the time, is tighten, loosen, tighten, loosen. You're always trying to go between, excitation and dullness, and, tightness versus looseness, and fixation versus spacing out. And so, really loosen up, and find a way of meditating that works for you. There's nothing that says you have to be in the 7-point posture of Vairocana and do it just right. If I personally like to do some of my best meditation in my rocking chair. There's something about rocking that works for me. Other people like to be in the supine position. Several people like to get those zero gravity chairs and meditate on space. Find something that works for you and creates relaxation, where you can actually just practice that tighten, tighten, loosen, loosen. You know.
Like the lute strings.
That's right.
Concert violinist, so that's a perfect image. Thank you so much. Really, thank you infinitely. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah? Uh-huh. He's going to bring the mic, you know.
Thank you, Lamala. Thank you for all your teachings and the teachers that you have. My question is about spontaneous self-compassion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. You probably mean non-spontaneous self-compassion. Yeah. You know, self-compassion can be really, really difficult. I'm just going to draw on a couple of techniques from Kristin Neff. She's a psychologist, transpersonal Buddhist psychologist who teaches a lot on self-compassion, and you can actually go on her website and get a lot of great techniques. And sometimes when I'm really in the struggle and I'm just beating myself up and driving myself and being a perfectionist and I just can't, you know, or I feel guilty or remorse at hurting somebody and I'm just all tied up and I can't get out, you know, of myself. You know, Kristin Neff says, try to do something somatic that just conjures up a sense of self-compassion. She has three things she recommends. One is just put your hand on your cheek. Everybody do this. Just put your hand on your cheek. It's just like, there, little one. It's okay. It's all right. You know, there's something about the hand on the cheek that's just makes you relax, like your mother, or if not, if you didn't have a good mother, somebody probably put their hand on your cheek. You know? And the other one is, you know, give yourself a hug. You know, just really, really tighten, squeeze, and then kind of release and get that relaxation, but that self-love. Or put your hands on your heart and do it to the extent that you actually feel the warmth and the opening of your heart center. And these things will shift us into self-compassion, I believe, quicker than anything else. You know, they just... I'll give you one more, and this actually comes from the Corden Rushin, which is more of an advanced practice, but anybody could really do it. You know how we chew on something, kind of like with a dog on a bone, and you're just perseverating? That's what we call it in my field. And you're just you're getting all tweaked out, and you know, you just feel like maybe you can't stand the tension anymore. Well, I'm not going to give the full technique, but there is this meditation practice where you stand up, maybe in your bedroom where you have a nice soft bed, and you know, and you just perseverate to the point where you can't take it anymore, and then you just flop onto your bed. You flop, and you release, and it's almost like you release because you can't take it anymore. But that's okay. That's a simulated experience of releasing the struggle and feeling the open space and the transformative possibilities in that space. That's what I would recommend, being somebody who's struggled a lot with self-love. These somatic techniques have been actually really helpful. Yeah. Any last questions? Again, plenty of good texts on the technicalities, should you want to open one up. I recommend the two in the middle. Well, no, I recommend all of them, actually. Yeah. Shall we meditate, or have I worn you out? Meditate. End on a spacious note. Okay, well, let's end then on this combination of shamatha and vipassana. And I'll guide us through, I guess we'll use Lama Allen's favored tricycle. Shamatha on the breath, most coarse level. shamatha on the mind, and then shamatha on awareness, awareness of awareness. And then we'll move in with a little bit of vipassana on the four thoughts that turn the mind. So everybody get in a nice, comfortable position. Maybe you've meditated a lot. I have for 40 years, but I still run through the 7-point posture of Roshana, depending on, it doesn't matter how you're sitting. Very simple. Start from the top, go to the bottom. Eyes cast downward, slightly open. Mouth slightly open, tongue on the palate of your top, behind your top teeth. Your neck, like a shepherd's crook, you can kind of move it open and then move it back so you feel that opening, opens up the channels of the energy. Shoulders back and down like vulture's wings, opening the heart center. The spine straight and erect. Metaphor is a stack of gold coins. Hands can be just relaxed on your legs in the Dzogchen way, or more in line with the Buddhist jhanas. You can have one hand on top of the other with the thumbs touching, 4 fingers below your navel. And your feet either in Vajra position or half Vajra, or on the ground, whatever will support really the straightness of your back and alignment of your head. Natural liberation says, when the body is straight and erect, the channels are straight. When the channels are straight, the vital energies are straight. And when the vital energies remain straight, awareness settles in its own natural state, and the meditative state occurs naturally. So starting with the outermost level, the coarseness of the breath. You can take a couple of deep breaths just to identify it in your body. Sometimes we're not even aware of it, so first find it. And then let it relax. And often we start somatically, feeling the way the breath is like an internal massage. As your clothes moves against your skin against your muscles against your bones against your organs against each other. It's really like an internal massage. Go ahead and let yourself have it. It's free. And just take some refuge in the breath. It's one of the things we don't have to do. Be grateful for breath and gravity, 2 things we don't have to control. And as you watch the in-breath, as it turns around to the out-breath, as it turns around to the in-breath, just notice that little tiny bit of gap in between the turnaround. Gaps are everywhere. We can practice anytime. And just relax into that gap. That in-breath, that out-breath, it's going to come. So relax. begin to move a little more inward, a little more subtle. And begin to focus your awareness on your thoughts, the mind. Thoughts never end, they never stop. They go around like a carousel of ponies. And at first, we're just trying to keep those ponies on the carousel, not running off with us. But if one does, just bring it back. You're not losing your awareness of breath. You're keeping about 20% on breath. Now about 80% of awareness on mind. And try to watch the thoughts without distraction, without dullness. And can you identify the gap between thoughts? That space between when one thought ends and another thought begins. Begin to focus on that gap, that space. Can bring a little bit of vipassana into this part by simply observing, where do thoughts come from? How do they dwell? Where do they go and how do they go when they go? Do you really have any control over that? I think most of the time, like dreams, we just wake up in the middle of a thought. We don't even know how we got there. Just watch these thoughts in space. See if you can catch their arising, their duration, and their exhaustion. And then one more level inward, more subtle. Inquire, who's watching the thoughts? Who's watching the breath? What is it that's aware of all of this? Turn your awareness towards itself, awareness of awareness. Become interested in the watcher, the aware person, the one who's awareing all of these things. Sometimes described as trying to see your own face. What is it that's aware? Is Is it something? Is it someone? Is it nothing? Where does it come from? Is it in your body? Is it out in the room? Do we all have the same one? Just take refuge in that state of awareness. Rest in awareness. If you find yourself tightening up, focusing too hard, just remember Machik's words: tighten, tighten, loosen, loosen, hold it tight and throw it far, throw it away. Just return to the pleasure of awareing rather than the subject-object looking at awareness, or looking at thoughts, or looking at breath. Relax into the awareing. And let's bring in a little formal vipassana on the four thoughts that turn the mind, which was in fact the backbone of my talk today, the backbone of our life. This is a poem on the four thoughts given to me by Yangtong Tuka Rinpoche. I've yet to find the source. It's very beautiful. I'll say it slowly so we can meditate on each portion of it. This life's freedoms and favorable conditions are very hard to attain. Having obtained this opportunity to accomplish beings' welfare, if I do not bring about this benefit, how will I ever get these excellent circumstances again? three realms are ephemeral like autumnal clouds. Observing the flux of beings' births and deaths resembles watching a dance. Beings' lives pass like flashes of lightning, rushing as quickly as a steep mountain waterfall. When his or her time comes, even an emperor or empress must go. The possessions and kith and kin will not follow after them. Wherever beings abide and wherever beings wander, their karma trails them like a shadow. Under the power of attachment, becoming, and ignorance, all beings, humans, gods, and the beings of the three lower realms, mindlessly go round and round among the five classes of beings like a potter's wheel spins. And as we end our meditation, just imagine awakening today, liberating in the gap today, waking up out of suffering, and liberating in one of the gaps you encounter today. What would that look like? How would you be different? What kinds of things would you be thinking and feeling? Would your actions be different? Would your day go differently? Who would notice? What would they say? what would you say back? Like Lama Allen says in his fourfold vision of flourishing, dream big, dream well, imagine well. Why not? And let's bring this meditation to a close and dedicate any merit gained to the well-being of all sentient beings.